Hi, my name is Victor Matheson. I'm an economist at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester, Massachusetts. I had the good fortune to be at this conference a few years ago when it was in Greece, talking about the economics of the Olympics. So I thought I'd take a moment here this year to talk about how COVID-19 has affected the Olympics and affected spectator sports in general. So there are few industries out there that have been more affected by COVID-19 than spectator sports. Let's just take a look at a bit of the data from the United States. If we look at payroll employment, for example, if we look at all industries in general, between February and April, kind of the peak of the boom to the depths of the recession, the United States lost about 21 million jobs overall in payroll employment, 14%. So about one in every seven jobs nationwide disappeared. But in leisure and hospitality, a sector that includes restaurants as well as hotels, it's down about 50%. And performing arts and spectator sports, which is, again, a subsection of that, also down about 50%. So we've lost about half of the jobs in the sector that includes spectator sports. If we look at other measures, things like television ratings, ESPN, the biggest sports network in the United States, ratings down 62%. The Golf Channel down about 40%. What are we watching instead? Well, lots of other stuff. CNN is way up. Fox News is up. The Learning Channel, which does home improvement, so I guess we need something to do while we're all stuck in our homes. Also, other things like Netflix. Netflix has gained 15 million subscribers worldwide since the beginning of the COVID crisis. Disney Plus has 50 million new subscribers since it debuted in November. Again, so there's some things that work pretty well in a world where we're all sequestered. Professional sports doesn't as well. If we look at live sports production, in April 2019 in the United States, about 30 million people attended some sort of a live sporting event. In April 2020, that number was approximately zero. So enormously hard hit. And of course, why? Well, one of course the big reasons here is live sporting events like COVID-19 are super spreader events for this disease. How did Valencia, Spain, and Milan, Bergamo become the epicenters of COVID-19? Pretty simple. Even before it was known that the disease was in Italy and Spain, major sporting event where Atlanta played Valencia in Milan, huge Champions League match there. And there is literally no sort of event that can be worse for the spread of COVID-19 than huge numbers of people all packed together, singing, shouting, yelling, hugging one another. It doesn't get any worse than that. And in fact, huge numbers of both spectators as well as the athletes themselves came down with COVID-19 following this place. And again, those two cities were the epicenters for COVID-19 in Europe, the first places where COVID-19 got a strong hold in the area. So what makes the economics of sports so problematic during COVID-19? Well, first of all, the product can't be done at home. So obviously I'm sitting here in my bedroom producing this video. I can do that. Lots of other people are able to work from home. However, LeBron James, Cristiano Ronaldo, all of the great athletes, not something they can do at home. Second, most sports involve physical contact, so the actual athletes themselves have no ability to social distance. This is an athlete from my university, College of the Holy Cross. That's Lauren Manis, superstar basketball player, but clearly not social distancing as she puts up some points. Actually, she was drafted this year into the WNBA, but again, not an ability to social distance. Workforces to produce events are surprisingly large, even if there aren't spectators there. So in this picture, obviously, we have a bunch of people there in the background, but even events without spectators require huge numbers of people to make the event happen. The Bundesliga, which is the soccer league in Germany, has started broadcasting matches again at this point, but they have 300 people at the stadium, even though there's no crowds. So between the teams, the coaching staffs, the training staffs, the medical staff, security, media, and television production, 300 people. So it's very hard to, again, socially distance and have small groups together when there are so many people involved in the production of professional sports. And of course, the last one here, which is very problematic for sports, is this. It's what's known as the uncertainty of outcome hypothesis. It's the oldest theory in all of sports economics, dating back to 1956. And what this says is the popularity of sports derives from people not knowing what's going to happen, having an uncertainty about what the outcome of a match is. This is not the same in all entertainment. So, for example, in 2019, the very most popular content on Netflix in the United States was the sitcom Friends. Friends has not been on television for 25 years, and everyone knows after 10 seasons of Friends that Ross and Rachel are going to end up together. And I hope I didn't just ruin that for someone out there. But even though we know the outcome of the sitcom by the end, it's still fun to go along the adventure on the way. Which means that people who have past content still have the ability to sell that content to people because it remains entertaining even after repeated viewings. Sports is not like that at all. Even though the NFL has thousands of hours of football games in its library, no one wants to watch any of those games because everyone knows what the outcome of those games is already. So, despite the fact that they have past content, they can't actually use that content to generate revenues. Again, because once people know what the outcome is, sports becomes unentertaining. Which means you need some sort of live events. And of course, as we saw, live events cause huge problems associated with potential coronavirus. I should also point out, and this is also something that's surprised lots of people, spectator sports is a surprisingly small industry. I just have American League revenues here. If we went worldwide, these revenues would be roughly double, but there's about $50 or so billion of revenue in the entire professional spectator sports industry in the United States. That's not really very much. The NFL, the largest league in the world, generates about $16 billion. That's roughly the same size as Sherwin-Williams, which is a paint store in the United States. Major League Baseball, the second largest professional sports league in the world, about the same size as ONEOK, a gas pipeline company in Oklahoma. The NBA, about the same size as Darden Restaurants. That's Olive Garden and Lone Star Restaurants. So again, pro tennis, minor league baseball, and Major League Soccer all put together in the United States is smaller than Energizer. Yeah, the battery company with the little pink bunny. So it's surprisingly small, but spectator sports has a social impact that's way larger. If you ask people in the United States, when did the COVID-19 epidemic really become real to you? When did it become a crisis? I think a lot of people will say this. It's the moment that the NBA, immediately prior to one of their games, says that we are shutting down for the foreseeable future. NBA player Rudy Gobert tested positive for coronavirus, and immediately they shut down the league. That's a point for a lot of people. So even though this isn't a huge business in terms of dollars and cents, a lot of people pay attention to this business. And therefore, when did the coronavirus problem become real? It became real when businesses that people followed had to fundamentally alter the way they behaved. So, one question is, can sports be played without fans? Of course, one answer for that is that the Florida Marlins have been experimenting with this for 15 years. That's actually a pretty funny joke. If you knew anything about the Florida Marlins, you will know that they don't ever get any fans, but that's not because they're trying to play without fans. It's just because they're terrible. More realistically, prior to the season, we actually have seen lots of occasions where we have played matches without any fans at all, not because the fans didn't show up, but because the fans were prohibited from showing up. Mostly this covers soccer matches in Europe. About 150 soccer matches in Europe after World War II have been played behind closed doors, mainly due to incidences of racism within the crowds or fan violence or some sort of corruption, which meant that the league banned fans from showing up for some games. We are now experimenting with this again. The Bundesliga, which is the German soccer league, was the first big league to return. They returned on May 10th to open to stadiums without fans. Serie A, which is the Italian league, La Liga, which is Spain, and EPL, all returned the week of June 11th. That's obviously happened by now, by the time you're watching this. Those have all returned. There's a picture of Eintracht Frankfurt playing their first match in front of, again, no crowds. 70,000 seat stadium, 50,000 seat stadium, totally empty. In the United States, we've seen some events return as well, again, without crowds, some modified golf events. Golf is a fairly easy sport to do some social distancing in. NASCAR, again, another sport easy to distance. That's auto racing, as well as mixed martial art fighting events. We've already announced that in the United States, other events will go on, again, without crowds. The Belmont Stakes, one of the three large horse races in the United States, will take place in June. Major League Soccer will return in June or July, as well as the National Women's Professional Soccer League, also returning in June. The NBA has announced it's going to return in July, again, behind closed doors without crowds. The NHL has announced that they will return, but the date on that is unclear. We've also had other events that have just been completely canceled. Minor League Baseball in the United States looks like it's not going to take place at all. Marathons, for example, the Boston Marathon, the oldest and most prestigious marathon in the world, won't run at all this year. Wimbledon, a tennis tournament, not going to happen. Eredivisie, that's the Division One league of soccer in Netherlands, as well as the League One, the French league, aren't returning at all. So different leagues have made different choices about how they're going to go back, but a bunch are at least trying to go back without fans. So how's it working? What happens there? So how do closed doors change the game? Well, one thing actually we know is it eliminates home field advantage. One thing that has always been a truism is if you play games at home, you have a much better chance of winning. That's true in all sports across all time. The data on games played without crowds, though, shows that this has totally eliminated any sort of home field advantage. Why is that the case? Well, one, at least potential ideas, it reduces referee errors and potential referee biases that get when they get influenced by rowdy crowds. Of course, this is an economics lecture, so how does it change things from an economic side? Well, here is the U.S. Open tennis tournament. So U.S. Open has decided that it will try to come back. It plays at the end of August and early September. In 2018, it got about $120 million from broadcasting. That's about a third of their revenue, and another 20% from sponsorships. Both of those pieces of revenue streams can be kept largely in place as long as the game can go on, even if there's no crowds. But they rely on about $160 million from concessions and tickets. That's about 45% of their money. So they're going to lose the U.S. Open about 45% of the revenue they would normally gain by putting things behind closed doors. But 55%, 54% is better than 0%. So there's a good incentive for the league as well as the players to keep this tournament going. Of course, there's Serena Williams and Roger Federer. NFL, a league that, again, depends primarily on broadcasting and other national revenue, things like merchandise sales and sponsorships. So you keep those in line, as well as the local as well as some local revenue, which includes sponsorships. Both the NFL and the NBA think that they can keep about 60% of their revenues intact, even if they have no fans in the stands at all. On the other hand, other sports aren't as well off here. Major League Soccer in the U.S., only about 18% of its money comes from broadcasting and another 27% from sponsorships. But again, if most people are being exposed to a team's brand, mainly through going to games rather than watching on TV, those sponsorships are worth less money. So Major League Soccer can probably only count on maintaining about 40% of its revenue if it has to go behind closed doors. So again, different sports are different. Things like minor league baseball, none of their money comes from broadcasting, or at least very little, and so therefore they have the least incentive to return, which is why we're not likely to see minor league baseball this year in the United States. Same thing with the Boston Marathon. Although it's a professional race that has large prize money for the top racers, the main reason that race exists is for the 30,000 casual runners that are part of that race. So again, without the ability to have the 30,000 runners who are just racing as amateurs in that race, it makes no sense to actually host that race. What about local economies? Well, most of the time, economists would say that the loss of sports to an economy is fairly minor. So if we look at total employment in the U.S. sports sector, it's about 150,000 people, and it's highly seasonal. If you compare that to the U.S. Postal Service, There are 630,000 people who work for the Postal Service. So 4 times as many people are mail carriers in the United States than work anywhere in the spectator sports industry. Or Walmart. Walmart has about 1.5 million employees in the United States, 10 times as many as we see in the sports industry. However, the question is, there are some caveats here. There's obviously huge local neighborhood effects, right? If you're that sports bar right across the street from a sports venue, you rely on that venue being open for a huge amount of your business. So even if the total effect isn't that big overall, there can be huge local effects. So, for example, this is Wrigley Field. I used to live about a block away here. You can actually see my house on this map. Wrigley Field is built right into the city grid there. You can see all those blue dots. Those are all different bars and restaurants, and most of those bars and restaurants exist primarily to cater to fans 80 days a year as they pour out of the stadium after games. So the loss of Major League Baseball would be devastating to this economy, even if the overall effect on Chicago isn't that big. Another reason we think that sports aren't generally a huge contributor to the economy is what's known as the substitution effect. That is, if a sports team didn't exist, people would just go spend their money elsewhere in the local economy. So we've measured what happens, for example, when sports disappears because a team moves or a league doesn't exist for half a season because of a strike or lockout, and we see almost no effects on the economy. Again, because the money that would have been spent right there at Wrigley Field, it simply gets spent elsewhere in the local economy. Of course, in a world of COVID-19, that's not happening. If I don't spend my money at the local arena or stadium, since everything else is closed as well, I'm not spending money there either. So here's a case where actually sports might be a real loss. Every dollar not being spent on the NBA, on the NHL, on Major League Baseball, or Major League Soccer is money that's not getting spent all in the local economy. And of course, public finances. $17 billion in municipal bonds have been sold since 2000 in the United States alone to finance stadium construction. Lots of those bonds depend on local businesses contributing taxes to pay off those bonds. Here, for example, is a new ballpark going in just in my neighborhood in Worcester, Massachusetts, a minor league ballpark. All that red area you see there is all a tax increment financing district that they say, look, if you build this brand new stadium, which is set to open here in a year, what's going to happen is there's going to be all sorts of new building in that red area. There's going to be new hotels, new restaurants, new retail. And the new taxes generated from that district, tax increment financing district, will go to pay off the stadium. Well, guess what? None of those new activities are going in there. No one's building new hotels in this economy. No one's building new restaurants, and no one's building new retail. So the city of Worcester has a huge bill that it has to pay, but none of the businesses that were going to go in to help pay those bonds are actually happening. So taxpayers are going to be on the hook here for a stadium project that doesn't have the financing it needs. What about colleges and universities? Now, mind you, this is unique to the United States, where we have huge spectator sports industries tied up in universities. This is the Ohio State University, huge university, big public university, 40, 50,000 students, and a gigantic sports program. So about $200 million is spent by Ohio State every year on its athletic program. Well, they finance that through revenues that are typically generated by that program as well. They count on selling about $70 million of tickets, primarily on college football. You have donors who donate specifically to the athletic program. They have media rights and appearance fees associated with another $60 million, plus sponsorships and other things. So at Ohio State, they basically pay for their entire athletic program through revenue largely generated by the program itself. However, if college football doesn't happen this fall, that's about $130 million of revenue that doesn't occur. Or if college football does take place, but you can't let fans into the stadium, that's at least $70 million and more like $80 million of ticket revenue. And some of that other revenue there is stuff like parking and concessions. And that all disappears. That means that they've got about an $80 million hole in their athletic budget. That's a huge hole to fill up, especially in a time when colleges and universities are already in terrible shape financially. My own institution, Holy Cross, a much smaller athletic program, we spend about $35 million each year on athletics. That being said, we count on very little in the way of tickets and other media rights to pay for that. Most of what we use to pay for our athletics at Holy Cross is actual school funds. We, as an institution, subsidize that. We basically pay for that like we pay for the economics department or other things out of general funds. And therefore, if we are shut down, we are not in nearly as bad a shape because we're not counting on ticket revenue and other media rights to cover our $33 million cost. In fact, most of our sports cost us a lot more money than they generate for us. Actually, shutting down something like men's or women's soccer in the fall would save us more money in travel than they generate for us in terms of media or ticket sales. What about the biggest show of them all? What about the Olympics? The Tokyo Olympics was already wildly expensive after postponement. Obviously, that was supposed to take place here in August. It has been delayed till August of 2021, and it is not at all clear that 2021 will occur. It was already wildly expensive before postponement, about $13 billion officially, although most estimates show that the numbers were far higher than the official numbers. The cost of postponement is gigantic. It's at least $2.7 billion. So why does it cost so much just to delay things by a year? Well, first of all, they have lots of venues that they have to maintain for or rent for an additional year, which they're hoping to be able to give that facility back prior to that. So they have to pay rent on that. They obviously have financing costs. Obviously, the way you pay for this is you borrow a bunch of money, you put up all your venues, and then you pay some of that back with the ticket and media rights. If those ticket and media rights don't come in, it's basically running a big bill on your credit card and holding that for another year. So finance costs. They also have contractual obligations and conversion delays. So, for example, they have a big athlete village that they have built for hundreds of millions of dollars, and they were planning to sell those units off as condominiums after the game is done, and they've actually sold a bunch of them already. Of course, now you have to delay that by a year, which means you have to buy out people's existing contracts. In other cases, you have venues that are already scheduled for August of 2021, and you need to buy out those contracts from the people who had planned to use them afterwards. This is extremely expensive. Again, $2.7 billion. And again, there is no guarantee that the Olympics happens at all. Remember, if you want to come up with something that's the worst possible thing that you could have during a pandemic, is have lots of people from countries all over the world, over 150 countries, many of whom are very unlikely to have coronavirus under control. By the time we meet in 2021, coming from all over the world, living in very close quarters from one another, and engaging in activities where there's lots of close contact with people. Again, almost you can't think of a worse situation to happen. Will we have a situation where we're in good shape in 2021? It's not at all clear that that's going to be the case. The question is, again, will Japan risk 11,109 athletes from 206 countries converging on the country? And that's unlikely to occur. Well, again, thank you for coming. Maybe we'll have some questions there. And if you submit them, I'll be happy to have some answers there. But again, I hope to see maybe some of you in person sometime in the future. It's obviously not going to happen this year. I don't even know that it looks great for next year, but hopefully we'll all be able to come together in person and we can share a drink at a future Business and Economic Society International Conference. Thank you.